Yes. Hi. I'd just like to talk about what happened and how this came about. After I gave my Hominid speech a few weeks ago, I got an email from Al Aho, and he suggested that we look at, based on this interview, we look at some of the stuff that could be happening in the future. Now, this one's going to be a little different talk than most of our talks, in that I'm going to show a slide. And since I don't know exactly everything that's going to happen in the future, we're going to stop after each slide, or even after a bullet point, if it's a good bullet point, and try to get some discussion on what people think is going to happen, or that type of thing. So anyhow, let me just, oops, I don't want to do that.
Let me just add, raise your hand if you have something you want to say, and I'll try to monitor that so John doesn't have to.
Go here. All right, so Yara Harari on the future of human with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes. This was a few weeks ago. Okay, so that was his talk. And Al, if you're on, maybe you can tell us, he gave you this quote, which I thought was quite enlightening.
First, thank you for taking on this task, but I thought it would be a proper sequel to your first lecture on ancient man. And I think Harari, who has thought about these issues, makes some very good points that it's better to try to plan for the future than have it happen on us. You've all heard the story of, if you put a frog in water and slowly boil it, you'll boil a frog. But if you throw the frog into boiling water, it'll hop out of it. I feel that maybe our society is like a frog in the boiling water of AI, and will soon be boiled with the water if we don't take some prudent actions on what we should let AI do and not do to us. So I think all of us should be aware of the potential hazards of living in an AI-dominated world and what consequences it can have. We're already seeing some effects of this. But the reason I'm particularly interested in this topic is, as a computer scientist, there's a precept in computability theory saying that this machine that Alan Turing created, the Turing machine, allows him to formulate a hypothesis that any function that can be computed by a Turing machine. And you can think of a Turing machine just as a computer with lots of memory. And if human beings are just biological computers, the Church-Turing thesis implies that we can be simulated by silicon computers. So Harari makes a distinction between consciousness and intelligence. Well, if consciousness is something more than intelligence, this would violate the Church-Turing hypothesis. So it's an interesting philosophical question of, are there functions that can be computed that cannot be computed by a Turing machine? The theory says no. So if you can find a counterexample to this, this would be a major revolution in computer science. Rather than get into the talk about the theory, I think some of the issues that Harari brought in his interview with Anderson Cooper are well worth discussing. And that is, how much should we let AI run our society? Some of the things that he mentioned, like having AI determine who we should hire, who we should vote for, who we should marry, are things that I just as soon like Homo sapiens to have control over rather than have machines decide this for us. but maybe it'd be interesting to hear other people think that maybe machines can do a better job of deciding who we should hire or who we should marry. So I welcome and look forward to people's thoughts on these questions.
Okay, so with that, I'll go on with it. One thing, like I said, what I did was I went in and picked up little phrases or questions that were asked, and I've created a slide on it. So about 70,000 years ago, language, our preference to gather in large groups, allows humans to collect information in cooperative biological groups that help drive the Neanderthals into extinctions. Well, Nolan once asked me with Mitch is what drove the Neanderthals into extinction, and although they think that this was a big part of it because the Neanderthals stayed in smaller groups, it seems like that since our African relatives came up to the north, that they brought a lot of tropical diseases with them. So that might have helped too, but I'm sure that both reasons are good reasons. So the start of collecting knowledge and storage of data in these groups, although it was mostly verbal then, it translated into the present day internet, misspelled, and the vast amount of storage is containing answers for all known questions. So does anybody have any comments on that? Raise your hand and we'll get
Mitch.
going.
Mitch, it's your turn.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, John. I look forward to continuing this conversation. I just wanted to throw something out there with regards to Al's issue of consciousness. And, increasingly, the reality of computers. I mean, it used to be that the avatars that we would see were just, really almost stick figures. And then they got better and better and better. And we're getting to the point now where we see movies and so forth where the action's quite realistic. I mean, we aren't to the point where we ever get faked out whether or not the characters on the screen are human or not, but that we're getting close. And so part of the thing I think that will happen with respect to consciousness is not necessarily some aha moment where AI all of a sudden, imbues computers with consciousness, but that the computers increasingly fake it. And so the first thing that's already happened is empathy. So it's very easy for a computer to hear something and analyze it and say, okay, this requires a thank you. This requires I hear you and I sympathize with your opinion. All of those rote responses. That's easily done just based on the language context. And so as we go forward, I think the machines may not be conscious in terms of some philosophical issue, but they'll be conscious in terms of their ability to act in the context of what's happening in the data inputs to the point where they can simply fake it and to the point where we don't really know that they're faking it. They're just chugging along doing their number crunching. But when it comes to the point where the machine's faking it well enough that we don't know whether they're really sincere when they say I'm sorry, then they've sort of kind of become conscious. And so I think the history, and I want to put out one other thing, the issue of the computer deciding who we should marry. In our culture, it's my right. It was my decision who I chose to marry, and I told my parents, and that was that. In many other cultures, particularly in India, the parents to this day tell the kids, you're going to marry so and so, and the kids say okay. And I have secondhand information about a college class where this came up, and all of the Western kids said, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. I want to make the choice myself. And the Indian kids said, You know, my parents been around for a long, long time. They know a lot of stuff, and they're probably better at picking a spouse than I am. And apparently, this got a lot of debate back and forth. But you know, we are culturally tuned in on certain things that you know we assume in the case of people here in New Jersey, America, the West, that this is the right way to behave. But there are a lot of cultures where a different behavior is perfectly acceptable. Okay, my 2 cents for right now.
Okay, Rich Jager.
Yeah, I think I want to continue that line of thought that Mitch was just presenting. Um, we have the question of consciousness, which was effectively raised by Harari and Alejo, and I'm thinking of values, which are perhaps part of consciousness. But it starts to get a bit like the kind of things that Mitch was just talking about, the attitude, if you will, the values of the Indian young people versus our Western U.S. people about how you choose a spouse to marry, and it's those values that are perhaps hidden in that veil of consciousness that concern me. Different cultures, different people are going to have different values, and how that might work into an algorithm is concerning. So I think maybe the question of values is even more to the point, at least in my mind, than just consciousness in general. So I'll pause at that point.
Okay, next is Boppy.
Oh,
I think you're muted, Boppy.
The value system is one thing, but I think emotions is another thing. I'm going to tell my personal story. I was working for Bell Labs after my PhD, and I was in California, and I went back home and asked my mother that maybe I do not want to live here all my life, so I want to choose somebody from India. And she selected a person through family connection. And I met her in Calcutta. And we talked and talked and talked. And was trying to, we knew what is our purpose. So we went through huge amount of interaction in a very short time. And at the end of it, she proposed and I accepted. And that was not the only thing. The thing was not only the choice, but there was some real emotional exchange. And I think the computer use of emotional exchange is missing in the equation when you think the computer will take over yourself. So I'm not that afraid that the computer will take over I don't think that will happen as long as we have emotions. Emotion play a very strong role in this affair. So that's where I think things will not work.
well, if I can interject there, that nowadays the kids have an app where they can just flip through and find a one-night stand with no emotions attached. So it's gone from your extreme all the way to the new extreme. Are there any more comments for this, Tom?
Yeah, there are a number of the hands up. Griff Smith is next in line.
Okay, now I have myself turned on. I have some fears that we're going to be forced into being more and more automated because of the changes in the design of these systems that we're using. I'm having a serious issue with the car that we bought 2 years ago. This was the first time I have owned, my wife actually has owned a car that has a PC screen in the middle of the console. That introduces having to understand the finite state machines that you have to use to change the state of the car, which means I have to spend quite a bit of time practicing how to use the controls on my car, where I used to be able to just push a few buttons on the console and spend most of my time looking through the window and being a driver. Now I have to Kathy has to be my co-pilot to deal with the computers on the car, while I'm the one who is dedicated to watching the traffic and making sure I aim the steering wheel in the correct direction. This is, for me, this is a very frustrating experience. I went to the point, for example, of having to have the car turned on in order to run the computer. And as a result, and when I was doing this while the car was parked, and as a result, I ran the battery down while I was trying to learn how to use the computer. I find this very frustrating, and I hope that and I suspect what's going to happen is we're going to quit driving cars because the technology will force us to get to the point where the car and the computers in the car take full control of your driving experience. And instead, you will simply tell the system where you want to go and let it take care of the details. And I hope it makes the right decisions.
Yeah, no, that's a big concern in so many of these things. Al Aho, do you want to comment?
Yes, Mitch made a very interesting and important observation. And this concerns, how do you tell if simulated feelings are different from real feelings, or simulated anything is different from the real thing? And it already happens with people. I know a personal case where a young man fell in love with an immigrant woman who simulated feelings for him only to be able to get a green card so she could stay in the country. So they got married. She was then able to stay in the country. And as soon as she got permission to stay in the country, she divorced him. So the fact that computers can simulate feelings doesn't mean that human beings can't simulate feelings that aren't real. So this simulation is a very interesting topic of, are we living in a simulated reality or a real reality? And a lot of the issues that we have with, say, the politics of today, how do we know what's real and what isn't?
Very good point.
The Matrix.
Jim Fagan, you're next.
Yeah, on the business section of today's New York Times, on the first page, which takes up about 60% of the first page, is titled, "Can a Machine Learn Morality?" And the first paragraph says, researchers at an artificial intelligence lab in Seattle called the Allen Institute for AI unveiled new technology last month that was designed to make moral judgments. They called it Delphi, after the religious oracle consulted by ancient Greeks. Anyone could visit the Delphi website and ask for an ethical decree. And the gist of it is it seems to conclude that its Delphi's judgments can be as confusing as those of humans. But this is the lead article on the first page of the business section of today's New York Times.
Okay, George Cull, you're next.
Getting back to John's first slide that he had up, which we've diverted a bit from, I'd like to talk about the Neanderthals. And what they're finding now is it seems like instead of killing off that branch of the tree, we actually merged with it. So is that going to be our future, where we will merge with the machine? And to be honest, I think that's probably the only way we could right now have any horsepower in the artificial intelligence world to be able to do that.
I would agree with you, and I would think Harari would agree with that too. There are other things written, I can't put my finger on top of them right now, about how we are going to merge in the future. Alan Chenoweth.
Yes, sort of picking up on that same point. My thought so often is that technology, the advance of technology is irresistible. Is going to happen. All these things are going to happen that we are talking about. The machines will be able to acquire and incorporate all these human qualities and values and consciousness and so on. And so where does that lead to? And question, in short, will these machines become so capable that they will be able to reproduce themselves? And at that point, we really have parted ways and created a new species.
That's very concerning. It is a deep question, and I don't think most of us know the answers to that. That's why we're talking about it. Herb Waddell, we're going to go to you, and then after that, we'll go back to John to get to the next slide, because I think he has a dozen or so, and we do want to not have this last all afternoon. Herb. You're muted, Herb.
First, we already have self-reproducing computers. I call them Homo sapiens. And personally, it's a lot more fun than having an electronic device to it, an electromechanical device to it. Way back when Boppy was talking, he reminded me that we got on the subject of selecting a mate at the Chatham Senior Center. And it was very enlightening to hear his story about how he selected a mate and got married. And it made me think, hey, that's not a bad system. Should have good results. But just for kicks, I looked up my old address book that I got as a graduate from high school and kept annotating until I got married. And I told Boppy, well, my sampling involved collecting 86 or 89 names and addresses and phone numbers of young ladies until I finally made the ultimate choice. A machine would do that in a split nanosecond. But it was a lot more fun the old-fashioned way, digitally and so forth.
But even if we want to consider that if a machine would make that choice, even if you want to go there, somewhere the data has to get into the machine, and we have different opinions on what, I mean, we can each look at something or another person and come up with different conclusions. And so who selects the data that gets in so the machine can choose? I mean, I don't know how we answer these questions.
Well, if the machine has the data on all of us, you can just, as they do now, they go online and they pick someone who looks
No, I
right,
hear you,
right
but
age.
data is frequently biased. Data is different, unfortunately, depending on who's looking at it. So how these machines, how do we select what data they have on any of us?
Oh, we have to assume the machine is perfect.
Well, I've never been able to assume that. John.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, well, that's always, I mean, I've worked in technology since I graduated from college, and that was one of the first things I learned, garbage in, garbage out. John, you want to move on?
Yeah. So the next slide just kind of tells us that what he thought is in a century will be as different from today's humans as we are from chimpanzees. And when you think about it, if you think about what's happened to us in the last 10 or 20 years, if you had somebody from the 70s look at a person nowadays, person walking down the street talking to himself when he's on his cell phone would just completely throw him. So although the physical changes haven't happened yet, which I believe we're either going to have bigger thumbs or or like this slide shows, we may just be able to stick the card in our head and get connected. So any thoughts?
John, we're not seeing any
We're
slide.
not seeing your slides. We're seeing
Okay.
at least I'm seeing gallery view.
All right, I got to restart it, I guess. Hold on. Okay, let's do that. Let's do screen content. Sorry, guys.
Does screen share click off if you don't use it for a while? I mean,
I think mine does.
okay. We had a long,
there we go. Can you see that?
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, the question is, I think we've changed so much in the last 20 years from the way we were. And just think if you go back 200 years where people would be absolutely be amazed that of some of the technology of being able just to contact anybody instantaneous and to get basically an answer to anything just by going on the internet. So with that, are there any comments or questions? Tom?
Nobody has their hands up at the present
Okay.
time. I mean,
We'll go
that's, you could say, I mean, that's kind of what Harari was speculating, that
Right.
we will be a new species.
All right, so the next one is, how do you guys feel about gene editing for the rich is basically what he said, because let's face it, poor people have enough problem putting food on the table, let alone being able to go in and design a child with what kind of eyes they want. Interesting fact that I found was blue eyes were created by one mutation in a gene in one individual 6,000 years ago. So if you think about that, how many people have blue eyes and what gene editing might do to us, it's going to create, like he said, a whole new class system. Any thoughts on whether you think gene editing is a good thing, a bad thing? Because right now they're doing gene editing to remove some diseases that they can change the DNA and through CRISPR and make changes to the DNA.
I think it's both good and bad. There are certainly good uses for it, and there certainly are potentially very bad uses for it. And we don't understand the ramifications of some of the things that we do. And, therefore it's scary in a sense. Mitch.
Yeah, I just want to comment that, we always start with a rich versus poor dichotomy with respect to any of these novel technologies. And without too much ado, the important stuff, the costs go down. And so a good example is, over the past, our lifetime, let's just say, computers have gone from something that sat in a special room to something that sat on your desk to something that's in your hand. And now, you have all of these goat herders in rural Africa that are using their cell phone to buy and sell goats. And there's certainly a difference between, me having my own personal cell phone and somebody in a rural, very poor village in India that buys one and then sells minutes to everybody in the village in order for them to do their thing. And it becomes a little cottage industry for that particular person who's spent the upfront capital to buy this this business model. But still, gene editing for the rich will be something that will happen for quite a while. But will it eventually trickle down into, all of the other things? Just like we now have various operations that happen, when life-saving operations that happen for the poorest of the poor in third world countries. I don't know, but it is an issue. Gene editing of who gets it, much like we have an issue now of who gets a liver or a kidney. But it's one of those things that I think we can get past. The morality of all this stuff and the idea that
before I take a shower.
The idea that I want to have my kids be smart enough to go to Harvard, tall enough to play NBA basketball, and cute enough to marry the homecoming queen. That's a whole nother issue. Anyway, just it's I don't want to belittle the issue of rich versus poor. I'm just saying that as things go along, it isn't necessarily the determinator in terms of where we go with our society.
George, you're next.
The one issue also, which a lot of people I think still don't realize, is with genetic engineering, it can be passed down throughout the generations. So the question is, what happens? The human body seems to have a way of correcting itself in a lot of cases. What happens then? Does the gene die out? Does the splice disappear? Those are all things that, because gene editing is so new, we still haven't answered.
Okay, Al.
I reacted to a comment that Griff made about having a PC on your car console. One of the things that the new technology is doing is it's forcing us to become smarter. And gene editing, if enough people practice it, will also create a group of people who are smarter than what we perceive as average. So this raises the important question of what should we be teaching our kids so they can live and survive in this world of the future? A conventional education may not be good enough. And this, when I was teaching, I always thought about what should I be teaching my students so they'll be able to survive in the world of the future? And this is an ongoing question.
Okay, Don is next.
Yeah, so just piggybacking off a couple of other comments, I would start by saying that new technology isn't necessarily an advancement. And I often think.
You've gone mute.
You're muted, Don.
I'm sorry. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, back in the early 70s, people started wearing these orange glowing LED watches. And when I asked someone what it was, they said, oh, you can tell the time. All you do is you have it on your wrist and you use the finger of your other hand to push a button and this digital readout appears. And I said, so you need two hands to tell time, is that it? And they just kind of looked at me blankly. So, yeah. The other thing is with CRISPR editing, yeah, it can be good, it can be bad. On the bad side, I'm wondering with organ transplants, how long will it take till a maybe a subspecies of humans is created to basically raise organs for transplant purposes, and you don't need a brain or just a minimal function of a brain. What rights, if any, would they have regard to them? So that, to me, that's the CRISPR is a real dark side potential, even more so than AI.
Yeah, no, I mean, they both can have very bad ramifications if we can't control them. And I don't think most of us know enough or can come up with a methodology that's fair as to how we use these things in the future. Roger Burns had his hand up, but it seems to have gone down. So if that's the case, then Roger, did you want to say something or?
Yeah, all right, I'll speak for a minute. As a blue-eyed, red-haired fella, there's a saying, knowledge is power. And it seems to me this accumulation of this kind of data could be very frightening on a military scale, and even the gene editing. I'm thinking like kamikaze pilots or that kind of thing. It's you know, no one's mentioned that side of it, but that's came to my mind rather early.
Interesting. By the way, I can't see the red hair.
Well, it's you'll have to take my word for that.
I'll take your word.
You know, and that's my two sisters and
I
I.
for one don't want to see it.
The three of us had red hair.
The
And none,
recessive
of,
gene.
none of the grandchildren have had it, so we don't know where it came from, but it's gone again.
Oh, okay. Anyway, John, next slide.
Okay, connection to the future of internet, computer interfaces, implant bioconnectors. Elon Musk already envisions a future where we'll all have chips in our brains, and they will replace our need for keyboards, mouses, touchscreens, joysticks, steering wheels, and more. There's a guy who has already done this. He actually had an implant into his brain where he could do simple on-off type of interfaces, nothing real thing. But how do you feel about actually having our brains connected to the internet?
That's a really interesting question. We know how much on the internet is, let's say, biased. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'd want to go there, at least not until there were lots more controls than I can foresee at this point in time. Don, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I heard Elon Musk speaking about the neural implant, and he said he's doing this in the hope of saving humanity, because as AI develops, he envisions a time when the speed of communication of these computers will obviate the need to communicate with humans, because human lips can only move at a certain speed far inadequate for the computer's purposes. So they'll just kind of run over us. And the neural implants would be a way that we can communicate with them at adequate speed to keep us alive.
Okay, Mitch, did you want to add?
Yeah, I want I want those implants for me, but I don't want them for anybody that I disagree with.
That's one of the issues. And I don't know how we're going to handle that.
Well,
Oh, well, go ahead, John. Did you want to say something?
yeah, well, you know, this reminds me of an old Outer Limits episode where everybody had the implant and just a few people couldn't have the implants. And one of them happened to be this librarian guy who everybody kind of picked on. I mean, he took care of the books, and they wanted to get rid of the books, and he's trying to hide them and stuff. And so all these people are like super knowledgeable. All they got to do is close their eyes and they get an answer to anything because they're connected right to the internet. And then what happens is, to make a long story short, a virus gets into the thing. And so all these people who have been relying on this have to go back to getting books because they had to shut it down because it was actually killing people. Anyhow, I know it's a little sidestep, but I thought it was a great.
An interesting observation. Alan.
Oh, yeah, this discussion is evolving into, I'm beginning to see as a result of it, where it might lead to a completely new species. It will be through these transitional phases where we have hybrids between machine and human, and I think that will be a sort of two-way street of the human affecting the machine, the machine learning from the human, and they'll figure out in this hybrid mode how to start reproducing follow-on hybrids, and so the world will evolve into creating this new, totally new species.
Certainly, that is what some people think is going to happen, but we'll have to wait and see. But there are many risks with it. That would be what I would be concerned.
Yeah. There's horrible thought.
John, you want to go on to the next one?
Okay, here's a good one that I'm sure everybody likes. Netflix tells us what to watch. Amazon tells us what to buy. Spotify tells us what to listen to. Since I have all of these things, I find it very helpful that if I'm looking at a product, all of a sudden Amazon will come up with several things. If I like science fiction movies, and I think I've seen them all, Netflix will sometimes find one for me. And with Spotify, I found that I was listening to 60s music only before I had Spotify. Now I've found out that there's a lot of great music in there. I guess the downside of that is that all these people know exactly who I am. So their ability to hack a human, which he talked about, and then it goes all the way down to the ability to tell if a person is gay before they know it, and which was kind of a scary thought. So what we all have to realize is, we get these benefits, but in the background, they're figuring out what to do with us.
And they may be keeping us from certain, kinds of music or movies that they don't want us to see because it might make us think of something else. So even though they're good at predicting what we'll like, that doesn't mean that they will suggest everything that we will like.
Any comments?
No other comments? George.
I'd just like to say about the AI. Remember, AI is training. You're really just training a neural net to come to a decision that you've decided is the correct one. And there are failures in AI where it comes to a completely garbage result. So therefore, you need, you really need to be able to have AI self-correcting and continuous, not just one task. And that way it can learn for itself.
I unmuted myself because I can't get my hand raised. I've been talking through the chat, but with all due respect, I think we should get I think we should get a grip. I've been controlling myself, so I've been putting a lot of stuff in the chat, never wanted to talk. But Netflix does not tell us what to watch. Amazon does not tell us what to buy. Spotify does not tell us what to listen to. They suggest. They're not forcing you, John, to do anything you don't want to do. I've heard this word control used again and again and again through this whole dialogue. We're not at the point where Hal opened the pod bay doors has come yet. They're not controlling us. They're not telling us what to do. They're influencing us. They're getting power. They're getting more power. And I think, we're fully aware all the way back to 2001, all the way back to the Matrix, which I second Mitch's comment. We've been aware of what can happen with the power, the rise of the machines. It's not something we're unaware of. It's not black and white. We don't go from total freedom to total dictatorship. The influence, I think, is the word. I think if we're talking about the year 2021 and way past 2033, when you don't have to worry about Social Security, it's way beyond then when we have to deal with the control of the machines. So that's my 3 cents, just trying to get a little perspective. It's good to be alarmed. It's good to be alarmed, but get a grip. Get a grip. Get a grip, everybody.
Just for future practice, it's really hard to watch the chat as also watching the hands up. So I haven't been watching the chat.
It's okay. It was an exercise in self-control, and I think I made 38 minutes without unmuting myself. Not bad for me. I'm
Can
going to
we
go
hear
mute myself again.
So you can, we don't want to go there now, but you can't raise your hand? You're muted again, but okay. Mitch,
Yeah, one of the things that is about at least 5 years old, maybe more like 8 years old, that is a real good illustration of some of these issues of where the AI can go is Target has some analysis of people's buying habits, and then they use it to send out coupons and so forth. And one of them is if you buy this, this, and this, then it indicates you're pregnant. And therefore, they send out things like coupons for diapers and so forth. And they did that, and they got an irate note from Tom, I can tell you know the story.
Yes.
They got an irate note from a father saying, "How dare you, my 14-year-old daughter, you're sending her stuff about being pregnant, blah, 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 blah. How dare you," etc. And then about a week later, he sends back and says, "I'm sorry, there was actually something going on in my house I didn't know about." And so that's a good example of where, and again, it's kind of trivial in terms of, Target just simply wanting to sell more products. But the fact that, they can tell when somebody's pregnant based on buying, and there's a bunch of those kind of.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's
patterns.
probably not 100%, but it's probably, the majority. Right.
The only point is that, if they can do that for just simply trivial stuff, then one thing that Harari talked about, which is them telling you how you're going to vote, and at some point just saying, okay, we know in aggregate the 60 million people that might vote or that are going to vote are going to declare this particular thing. So without even having to go to the polls, we'll just declare this particular candidate the winner. That's not that far-fetched.
No.
And
Already happened.
despite all of the failures of polling in the last several elections, I see Herb's all excited about this one, but it's not that far off in the future, and it does raise questions. So I'm gonna stop.
Okay, coming back to Nolan's point of influencing, but where they can influence, they can avoid providing stuff that might be very useful to you to be making a more adequate decision, and therefore it's more than just influencing, or it's influencing in a negative way. It's potentially there. I don't know how we control it. Jim, you're next.
Yeah, John, you had said you only listed the 60s music, but then Spotify helped you get acquainted with others, and I'm wondering if that's you only listen to 60s, why it didn't just recommend 60s music to you, and how you ever got onto anything else.
Well, that's a good question, because it does try to do an analysis of something that might be like 60s music. So it will suggest stuff out of the 60s category. However, the way I started finding new music was, I don't know how many times I'd be on TV and I'd say, wow, that's an interesting song. And I'd use the sound hound to tell me what it was, and then I'd add it to my Spotify collection. And that's how I got into all these other genres. And Nolan, I want to apologize for using control when I probably should have used influence, but I like being influenced.
No, I like being influenced too, but we need, just like Social Security is going to be around in 2034, we just need to keep a little perspective. It's good to be alarmed by what can happen, because as I told you, when I got out of Columbia in 1971, the book that grabbed me was Future Shock, and it still grabs me. The pace of change is exponential. Things are changing so rapidly. Human beings cannot keep up with the pace of change. So it causes all kinds of emotional responses in us. And that's the anxiety. Here's a good word. We're right to be anxious. There's a lot to be anxious about. There's a lot of anxiety. We can't predict the future. Things are changing insanely rapidly, and all kinds of things could go very wrong. And we're right to be concerned about it. I'm just trying to keep a little perspective on it. That's all.
Hey, Nolan, you must have had your gorilla biscuits this morning. You won't let go of Social Security.
No, if you want to give me yours, I'm a nice guy. If it'll make you feel better to give me your Social Security checks, I'll cash them for you, Tom. I'm sorry,
Okay.
not Tom. Steve. I'm talking to Steve. I'm not talking to okay.
Al,
It was with some amusement that I read a review of a book in the New York Times on November the 21st by Kevin Roose. The book was titled The Age of AI and Our Own Human Future. It was written by Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and Daniel Huttenlocher. What was interesting about
actually, the Wall Street Journal had an article about that, I think, the beginning of last week. That's where I came across that. You know, they had on their editorial page, they had they summarized it as opposed to.
But what was interesting about Roose's article, that it was written by a neural net. He said it had better paragraphs than he had written as he was trying to write a review of the book. So he said, why don't I let this program, GPT-3, finish the review? And if you're not familiar with GPT-3, it's a humongous neural net that has billions of variables that's been recently created by Google. And it's changing the world of neural nets. And we haven't seen what influence it and its descendants are going to have on the world of the future. But I thought this was poetic justice of having a neural net write a book review on AI.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Al, have you read the book, the Kissinger book, and do you recommend it?
Well, after reading the review, I think there are much better books. And John's talk on the future of the hominid, I think is much superior to what I surmise in the book.
I just like to add another book report here. There's a good book which I read during our lockdown, it's called The Army of None. It gets into the whole AI ethics of what happens when an army is moving away from humans as the military force and moving to AI controlled equipment. I highly recommend it to read it. And that wasn't written by a net.
By who? Or by what?
It wasn't written by a neural net.
Oh, wasn't it? Okay.
Here, wait a minute. I'll get the Paul Scharre, Scharre.
And The Army of None is the title?
Correct.
Okay, Herb has his hand up, so I'm sure he has something exciting to say.
Well, the next step, of course, is for the Army of Nuns to decide it doesn't need any humans and take care of all the humans. But at any rate, no, I have a question for all of you artificial intelligence and computer experts, which I am not, but I'm starting to get old. And as you get old, your brain changes. You lose your memory, you lose your speech, you slow down. And I discovered that something that has happened all my life, I guess, becomes more noticeable when you get old. You're talking to yourself. Now, this came up at a full session earlier, but we talk to ourselves all the time. We think in language, but usually it's so quick, we don't even think about it. But when I want to multiply or say divide a price of an item by the number of ounces in it, I have to think about it now. It used to just come snap, you know, but now my brain works slowly. So I have to say, well, you know, what is 899 divided by 4? And I say, oh, well, use your old tricks, you know, 899 is 9, and adjust it. But the issue here, the question for you is, do computers have to talk to themselves to have this consciousness? Or is conscious the fact that I know I'm talking to myself? Is that a different aspect to computers? Or
I don't, computers get faster, they don't get slower. So, you know, I mean, unless it's broken, computers can do the same number of calculations in the same time. They don't, and typically that gets faster and faster. So they wouldn't have that technique. What I'm finding in myself is that I can't switch topics so easily as I used to. If I'm doing multiple things at the same time, I have to kind of stop and reset as opposed to just flip and know where I was in something else. I'm really finding that is deteriorating from what I used to be able to do. But so the switching network doesn't work as fast, which is, you know, sort of similar to what you're saying.
so it probably says that the computer and our brain goes through all these questions and uses techniques and so forth, but it's so quick that you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
The difference, the big difference, and this is very important, Herbert, great point. Computers, AI is programmed. They'll immediately come to the answer. They will not reconsider. They will not say, oh, I only know 8.99. I'm going to make it 9. Well, wait a second. Maybe I'm wrong. Computers and AI never reconsiders. It's not conscious. It isn't willing to reevaluate and go back to the beginning and start over again. That is a difference between a human and a machine. The machine will never reconsider a programmed answer. Interesting thing to think about, friends.
Yeah.
Al.
Nolan, in response to your comment about computers not listening to themselves, one of the techniques for training AI programs and neural nets or machine learning is to create an adversarial neural net that then looks at the responses of the one that you're trying to train, and it will inform it that it's not making the correct decision. So this has led to much faster training programs and much more accurate training programs. And also in computers, there's a lot of fault tolerance and error correcting circuitry that's in place, particularly if we go to quantum computing. Quantum computing, the qubits are so fragile, they need to have fault tolerance and error correction built in. So perhaps in the world of the future,
yes,
very powerful computers that have error correcting aspects to them.
You're beginning to worry me a little bit. I've heard about quantum computing very recently, and I know it's the power of these machines is just continually accelerating at an exponential rate. So
there's billions of dollars being invested in
how sophisticated they're going to become.
Nolan, don't believe everything you read. It's going to be decades before we have useful quantum computers.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to tell all you guys. The self-driving car guys, don't go down the street and think you'll have a self-driving car next week. Social Security is going to be around way past 2033. And it's great. I'd like to identify the word anxiety. I think that's what this discussion, the fear, the things the computers are going to control and dictate everything to us, and it's inevitable. We can't do anything about it. That we're anxious about that, as we should be.
As we should be, but there is a point that if you don't start doing something now, you can't wait until it's a problem. You have to start before that and start thinking about it and start investigating to come up with solutions, even if it's decades away. You set things in motion that won't stop.
Absolutely. That's what we're doing right now. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, but the majority of the country doesn't think about these things. And I don't know that most of our politicians do.
Walk around here or not.
Anyway, John, want to go to the next slide?
All right.
We want to get there, you know, the kids.
We got somebody talking in the background.
Someone's talking
in the background.
Someone's talking.
They have to go to Stop and Shop and pick up the stuff.
Whoever's talking should mute themselves.
Thank you. Okay, here's a good one. There's been a lot of stuff in the press. Will the likes of Facebook, Zoom, and Twitter eliminate the need for human contact? Now, I just read something the other day, and I don't know how true it was. It was in a magazine that said that nowadays, because of everybody, all these young people living on the internet, that the girls are finding that the guys really don't even really want to go out, which kind of really throws me for a loop. But how do you guys feel about that?
Nobody wants to comment on that?
One interesting comment that Yuval Harari made when he was talking to Mark Zuckerberg is that as human beings were developing and in tribes and in societies, people had to interact with people whose opinions were different from theirs. And this caused human beings to have to try to learn how to get along with one another. On the internet, you only talk to people whose opinions you agree with. So you don't know how to get along with people whose opinions you disagree with, as we did before. And I think this is an important consideration, that we should be exposed to ideas that are different from our own and be challenged by them.
Absolutely. But that seems to be diminishing, in my opinion, anyway, in the country. Jim Glenn.
Yes, I've seen some interviews recently with people who have said how important it is for humans to have contact with other people. That really that is sort of the essence of being human, is that we all really crave human contact and in-person kind of contact. And in fact, if you think back to one of the AARP slides we just saw a while ago, it said how AARP was very concerned about social isolation and indicated there are a lot of problems because of social isolation. So that's just food for thought.
Well, I think it was in the article, I'm not sure, but I think it was in the article by Kissinger and the Google chairman, which pointed out some cases where, we can make pets be fairly realistic at this point in time. We also have, we're getting to the point, maybe some places have robots, for want of a better term, that are giving medications to our elderly and whatever. And, they're getting to the point where you start having the relationships with them. And what does that do? Is that really the way you want to, if I were in a nursing home, I still think I'd want a relationship with people as opposed to something that can just provide my medications and, maybe simulate human activity. George.
Now you know why the reproduction rate is dropping below zero.
That's concerning. Okay. Anybody else on that, or should we move on to the next? John?
Yeah, and there's the fact that data collection is becoming more important than collecting money. I always thought money would be the big driver for everybody, but it seems like now these corporations want the information. Is that to make money, or what do you guys think about that?
Well, certainly, Amazon, was taking losses for years and years and years to get to the economy of scale, or whatever you want to do, so that they could start to make money. Their information is, and Facebook, don't pay anything for Facebook or any of those other things. They're collecting your information, so they're currently seeing it very valuable. And Facebook is the one who's just changing its name to Meta, so that Facebook is just a channel within Meta. They want information. It's clear that they want it. It's not 100% clear to me that it's the right strategy, but that is what they're all going after. The data is king. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I have a comment here, and I think this is why you see the rise of digital currency. Again, currency is a means of trading one thing for another. And by going to digital currency, it now becomes a world currency. Again, all the technology companies, that's what they want to trade in, not the US dollar, not the Chinese yuan, not the Russian ruble. or the British pound.
That's a good point. Plus, it does away with the need for physical money. You can't carry $1 billion very easily, but you can carry, a $1 billion cryptocurrency pretty easily if you wanted to.
Pretty volatile though.
I'm sorry, so Bobby, what did you say? I still didn't catch what you said.
I say that it is going to be very extremely volatile. If you see the cryptocurrency, the jump of it is all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's very volatile.
And it's somewhat disturbing.
You make $1 million in investing,
and you lose $500 million the next day.
And at least most of us don't have the ability to predict where it's going or where any one of them is going.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, John, you want to go to the next slide?
This goes again to the various databases know more about us than we know about ourselves. Is privacy a thing of the past?
Yep.
And our phones are tracking us now 24/7. I get a report from, I forget which one, I think it was Apple, that tells me every location I've been in for the last month. How do you guys feel about that? Should we, I guess you can limit it, but how do you feel about being tracked and everything that we do? And is privacy dead?
Total privacy is dead. I'll announce it. I'm telling you, all you guys, this stuff isn't going to happen for 10 years or 20 years or 30. Privacy is dead. I mean, there was a guy I worked with right before I retired in 2011, and he was a real privacy nut. I mean, he said, oh, they don't know much about me. I turned on my smartphone. I showed him a photograph of his lot, his house, his address, every place he'd been in the last month by pushing 3 buttons. And yes, privacy as we used to know it is not possible anymore, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah,
that's something to be anxious about. That's a real cause for anxiety. The ability of governments. I'm sorry.
No, it's not just using Facebook or Twitter or any of those other things. If you have any relatives or friends that are using them, they're connecting to you and getting data from you. So you unless you are completely off the grid, you can't avoid that information. You can minimize or not let all of it go so easily, but you cannot avoid getting data collected on you.
Yes, total privacy is dead. It's dead.
Yes.
RIP. Whether you like it or not. There I'm with the futurists. I like it. I'm okay with it because as the joke goes, I've got nothing to hide. Yeah, I get tracked just like John. I get a report every month, every place I've been, every restaurant I've been. I forget if it's Google or somebody else. And they have got me tracked for the last 10 years. And I've been in 35 countries and I've traveled 88,000 miles. And they have a record of every place I've been, which is kind of scary. But just shows what they have.
Well, if you had, malicious intent, that would be very scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Rich Jager.
So far.
Yeah, on the privacy issue, certainly we have less than we used to have, and that's just a fact. The thought that Nolan just expressed that, well, if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be worried about losing all your privacy. Well, I would have to disagree with that perspective because I don't know what those other people are going to do with that information, even though I have nothing to hide. So I take a perspective of where I have a choice, I opt for privacy. It's a little hard to figure out sometimes. My iPhone will say, do you want to allow this? And my general first reaction is, hell no. But then I have to think about it and see whether there's some benefit to me that might outweigh my initial reaction, being a self-correcting Homo sapiens. But Another example is some of the auto insurance companies will let you put a device in your car that will track your driving. And of course, the idea is that you're a safe driver, so you'll get a discount based on your actual driving. Well, that might be true for me, but yeah, I don't want to go there, so I refuse to do that. So I try to, as a personal preference, limit giving up any of my privacy where I have a choice.
I do too. Some of these things though they give you an option to like GPS tracking or things like that. I've gotten messages that says where I'm looking something up and I need that so that you can use it, but just while I'm using this application that it shuts down. I'm not giving concurrence that you can track me. I'm giving concurrence that you can track me at this moment until I stop using the app. And that's that I do at times because sometimes it provides good information.
Yep.
George.
Yeah, it boils down to digital rights. We look at it now, and what are they doing? They're pulling digital tweets from 20 years ago or 10 years ago and using it against people, not only politicians, but other people, because your history is being tracked. And that gets down to the question of who owns the information. Now, Europe tried to address this and said that you own that information, and therefore you have the right to be able to go and demand that they remove that information as of that date. In the US, we still haven't implemented that.
And there's lots of lobbyists against it, so I don't know if it will ever happen.
Yeah.
Herb, your turn again.
Well, the scary thing is, like at the January 6th demonstration in Washington, they scanned hundreds of people's faces and tracked them down on surveillance camera records all over the country until they found them. Now that is scary.
Yes.
You're just in a crowd somewhere, and the FBI can find out who you are, where you live. That is scary. Now, I'm like Rich. I don't like to give out my information, but I can't really avoid it. Right now, I'm wrestling with, do I get genetic counseling? It appears that I may have a mutant gene that puts me at risk for pancreatic cancer. So do I do it or don't I? I mean, then all my family, all my heirs forever and ever are tagged with the knowledge, whichever way it goes.
Yeah, no, it can be beneficial or it can be detrimental.
Yeah, so what do you do? Well,
sometimes it's better not to know.
It can't give me more than a couple of years. So with me, it's a fairly easy decision. But for other people, hey, a young person, do they really want their genome examined and recorded so that all of their progeny will have their genome on record? It's scary. We are in a scary time.
We really are. Okay.
And you can't get away from it by going off and becoming an Amish. It's too late for that. They don't have GPS on their wagons, I'm sure.
I doubt it. I doubt it. But you have to get away from any of this stuff, you have to be completely off the grid. It means no electronics. I mean, the Internet of Things is here, and is coming more and more. So your coffee pot can know things about you.
Yeah.
No, I'm seriously.
Coffee pot is watching you.
Yeah, or your toaster, or your refrigerator. Anyway, okay, John, you want to go on to the next one? Let me point out that it is 1 o'clock, and I'm okay with continuing for a while and how the rest of you feel. We started with 39 participants. We're down to 29, so we are losing some. And it's a very, at least to me, a very stimulating and interesting discussion. So, but let's think in terms of, trying to wrap up within the next 20 minutes or so, if that's okay with everybody.
It's okay with me.
You can always come back at another time and do another session if there's enough interest.
Bring it up at a luncheon meeting.
I'm sorry, Herb, what?
You could bring it up at a luncheon meeting.
Well, we wouldn't have the same group. We wouldn't have
Oh.
29 of us in one lunch. This is, at least we start out with the idea that the folks on this meeting are primarily, or not primarily, are at least somewhat interested in technology. So we have, subset the group to some degree based upon that. Anybody can join, but most people who aren't interested in technology wouldn't bother. Okay, John, I'm sorry.
All right, the next one is the following of the medical biomedical data, and a quick story. At my daughter's wedding, we had this great DJ, and he played some wonderful music, and then about a half year later or a year later, my daughter calls me up and says, "Guess what? That DJ was caught. He had murdered a girl and chopped her up, and they found him but through his DNA." So, and it didn't find him directly through his DNA, but they found it through a relative and somehow traced it back to him. And they probably got it by going to some wedding and getting saliva off of a glass.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things we have to think about with this medical databases that are out there. Of course, there's a lot of good stuff that's coming from this too. Like he said with the Israel, where in Israel, they just handed over all the medical records. And I don't see what the problem is if they don't have any individual identifiers to it.
Right, if they don't, but there's always people running it, and some people have access to, somewhere there's a link to who it is, and that information is valuable to the bad guys. And so somehow it gets out most of the time.
So any comments on how we feel about this? Tom, am I still on?
Yeah, you're still on. You're still on.
Okay.
Nobody's raising your hand.
Okay, I went past my limit. I went past my self-censoring limit.
If Nolan detects a void, he has to speak.
I'm often a shill when people do public speaking. I'm often asked to do this. Can you see this device I'm holding up here? This is a Freestyle Libre 14-day blood sugar monitoring device. So as a diabetic, I have this device and I can put it on my arm, and right now I can tell you what my blood sugar is right this second. Boom, it's high, 155. I used to stick my finger. You've seen the ads on TV, they're ubiquitous. I'm a 25-year diabetic, so I was always sticking my finger to get my blood sugar. Now I wear this. And it's just and my watch, of course, like everybody else's watch, probably. I can get my blood pressure, I can get my pulse, I can get all kinds of medical stuff. And the Apple Watches, I guess, are even more elaborate. So again, it's here. The biometric data wearing medical things on your body is here, if you have any desire for it. And it's a good thing, I think.
Well, I agree with you. It is a good thing, but it can be used for bad things if the wrong people have it. And so therefore controlling who has access and whatever becomes very important. And keeping it somewhat degree anonymous, I mean, not for you anonymous, but when you're collecting all the data, not necessarily having it easy to associate, having the data set, but not necessarily have easy access to who has what specific deformities or whatever you want to call it.
No, I'm a libertarian, so I'm sympathetic to privacy concerns. I can remember 30 years ago, London became the first city in the world that had TV cameras 24/7 over the entire downtown. So there was no more privacy in London, like 30 years ago. And that made me feel funny, but crime went down.
Yeah.
And of course, now we have, you wouldn't think not to have a murder that seems to be famous. It's always either there's a cell phone recording of it or there's another recording of it. Transparency, that's the word I'm looking for. Transparency with respect to crime is a good thing.
Yes, we agree.
That's all. That's all.
Okay, John, next slide. How many more slides do you have, John, just out of curiosity?
Not many more, I think 3 or 4.
Okay.
I can't get a count.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just was looking for where we are in the whole sequence. I mean, if it was going to be a lot, I was going to suggest we come back to it another time, but that's fine. Let's go on.
Okay, there's what he's talking about, a lack of transparency. It's nicknamed the black box problem because no one can see inside the network or its thought process. Not only does this opaquency undermine trust in the results, it's also a limit on how much neural networks can contribute to human science understanding of the world. What's happening is programmers are actually building analytical AI routines, and those programmers have no idea how the AI produced the outcome because there's so much code and branches that it's almost impossible to follow. So do we need to stop artificial intelligence from controlling us? And as I think a lot of us have been saying, computers, AI have intelligence. They do not have consciousness. Any thoughts? Nolan?
Well, since you asked me, yeah, this is important. And again, they're not controlling us. They're influencing us. They have power. I wrote in the chat, I thought it was a very good time during the discussion, how Facebook has admitted that they manipulated the population during the 2016 election with all types of algorithms that would get people angry and divided and mad because it made more money for Facebook. They wanted to get the most eyeballs on site the most times. Now Facebook realizes what's going on a bit. They've renamed themselves. By the way, I've sold my Facebook stock. Good luck with you guys. They now are on TV 24/7. Have you seen the TV ads? Facebook wants to be regulated now. They want regulation. They're all in favor of regulation now because they know it's coming and they know it's going to be harsh. So they're trying to mitigate it. Just a sign of the times. I think it's great that we're nervous. I think it's great that we're anxious. I just would like us to have a little perspective. That's all.
Okay. The concern I always have about algorithms is some human has to write the algorithm, and no matter who we are, we all have biases, and the biases get into the algorithm so that, it's not neutral. I mean, they may try to make it so, but generally it's not. It's got the author's biases are included in it, probably subconsciously. So it's concerning.
Facebook admitted that in the 2016 election, they were consciously writing algorithms to make people angry, to make people divided, to make people hate, both left, right, Dem, Republican, upside down and sideways. And they do it in other countries, even more, evidently, even more, Poland, Hungary.
And they'd probably still be doing it here if there wasn't a deeper look into it. I mean, because they're getting in trouble for doing it. Otherwise, I mean, they're not, what's the right word?
Altruistic.
Altruistic. That's the word I was looking for.
That's the word you're looking for.
That's the word I was looking for. They're definitely not that. They're in there to make money. And if they're in favor of it, it's because they think they can either mitigate how bad it will be or make it better somehow for them, or get a head start on it over what other companies have.
Yes. The power to influence mass thinking is scary, and the algorithms that can manipulate human behavior and emotions. I remember when B.F. Skinner was so popular. Remember the Skinner box in the early 1970s? When did we have free will at all, or do we all just live in a Skinner box? Yeah. We're kind of relitigating it, and I'm 72. If you're at that age that a lot of us are, we're kind of relitigating free will versus control. We're kind of relitigating that great debate that we had so long ago.
Yeah.
Do we have free will, or can we be controlled? Question.
How?
Tom, just a point of information. One of the most interesting things going on in AI and neural nets is using this program GPT-3 to generate programs from speech. And there's a nice video that was just posted on the creators of this OpenAI to generate computer games by somebody just talking to the screen, and it then produces a JavaScript program that creates a computer game that the person was describing. He was describing a game. Let's create a game where you have boulders falling from the sky, and then you have to try to evade these boulders. And it produced a very rudimentary computer game from just these spoken instructions. So I think the next phase in compiling or software technology is to have AI generate programs from different inputs, not just learning from previous inputs, but from things like talking to the computer. So watch this space.
Yeah, no, it's all changing fast. It's hard to stay on. I mean, I don't think any of us are completely on top of it. Some of us are better than others, but it's changing so fast. You really have to devote a lot of time to even try to understand what's happening.
That's exactly right.
Okay, John, next slide.
All right.
Whoa.
This has been one of my favorite pictures. And I can't help but believe that this is really happening to us. I mean, it used to be when these things first came out that you'd see a few people, and almost no older people like us were even bothering with them. And then within 5 years, 75% of the people have it. Now, where can you go that you don't see everybody, and when they've got a few minutes or seconds, pull out their phone and start having to connect, to the point where I walk around the lake and it takes us about 45 minutes every day. And my girlfriend can't leave the house without having her phone with her. It's like, she says, well, what happens if there's an emergency? And I says, what did you do before you had one of those? Anyhow, what I'm getting at in this slide is we've always been under some type of mind control. The first one was, as we said with the first slide, with the Neanderthals, was language. We started with language, and that kind of got us into concepts that we could carry with us. And then once we had groups of people, we needed a way to control all those people. So government stepped in, and with the help of religion, we needed something to give us a belief system. And then it got a lot more formal with writing and numbers as we started to put down stuff. And so this controlling process then went into the printing presses with books and the Bible. So everybody could go to some kind of print, and not everybody, but everybody who could read, but they would pass it down through whatever method. And then for the longest time, and I know this doesn't happen with the younger generation, but how many of us have a newspaper subscription that we wait for that New York Times on Sunday morning to tell us what's happening and kind of control what we're doing? And then radio took place, and everybody had to sit around the radio and get advertisements, whether they wanted them or not. And then the biggest one was television. I think that controls not only our thoughts, but gives us lifestyles that we want to emulate. And then came the big one, the internet. And once that started out, the internet started to basically control us, to the point where the smartphones started, as the picture shows, sucking our faces and getting us connected to everything. So the next one's going to be artificial intelligence. And it kind of reminds me of that movie, I forget what the name of it was, where Big Brother kind of takes over and we're controlled by what Big Brother has to say.
1984.
1984, and we've already been there, and 30 years passed.
So
but
anyhow,
we're right to be concerned.
So that was my thought. I think this is all a mind control to keep us in step with what the people who are in charge want us to do. Any thoughts?
I think it's a great graphic. I mean, I hadn't seen that before.
I'm sorry, Herb, I'll go quickly, then you go. I just like to keep modifying control. It's not a dictatorship yet. 1984 was written in 1948 by George Orwell to predict a communist dictatorship in 1984. It did not happen. There are a lot of bad things that can happen as a result of AI, but I think we're on our guard to some degree about it. And we need to be anxious. We need to be concerned. But I don't want to go back to the good old days because they weren't really as good as these days, in my opinion. I'm done.
Herb, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say, thank God, 2 little girls adopted me as their grandpa, and neither one of them has a phone. One is now 9 and the other is 15. They don't have phones.
I don't think it's that uncommon.
Parents want them to learn from books and.
Yeah, no, that I can certainly aspire to that, but I mean, I would think that it would be tolerable for a 9-year-old, but a 15-year-old in our society would be an outcast without a smartphone.
That's true, but who accomplishes things? Outcasts or sheep.
Okay.
There's nothing more conforming than a teenage girl.
Yes.
This young lady is writing novels. She is an actress. She performs. She can't now because of vaccination problems.
Right.
But
all power to her. But
I'm saying there's a glimmer of hope, and this is very depressing to me. That slide. Hey.
871005.
okay, if no more comments on that, let's move on to the next one. But John, I must say, I really like
This
that.
is the last one. Walt sent this to me when he found out I was doing this, and I thought it was an interesting comment. I don't think there'll be any comments on it, but
yeah, I guess I was probably copied on Walt's note because I know I don't remember where I saw it, but it's probably where I saw it.
so with that, unless there's some general comment or somebody wants to say something, I'm done.
Okay, well,
very stimulating.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
John,
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
John. Thank you. Great.
It was actually Al's idea, and John's the one who implemented it. So, but I thought it would provide food for a great discussion, and we wanted to do it quickly after John's previous presentation a couple of weeks ago. And they cooperated, and we managed to do it, and it worked out well. And we still have 27 of us left after approaching 2 hours. So I think most of us enjoyed it. I think it was worthwhile, and I agree with you, Nolan, that we should be concerned and anxious was the word you chose. And I think that's very descriptive. Yeah. But I think we have to start now. I don't think we can wait the 20 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 decades because it'll be here. No. We won't be here, but it will be here, and our kids probably or grandkids will still be alive.
Tom?
Yes.
Tom, I would just like to see if Al has anything to say to close it up.
John, John, I'd just like to add that you far, far exceeded my expectations.
Thank you.
Interesting talk.
Yes.
And your graphics are non-pari. Wonderful talk. Thank you.
Yes.
And Al, thank you for interesting him on doing this, because I don't think it would have happened without your instigating him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we work as a group and we try. Okay, all.